odds of skipping the closing ceremony this afternoon. We will announce honorable mentions in the Best Paper Award. And if you're not there to receive your award, somebody else will be giving that acceptance speech. Okay, so with these announcements, it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Professor Mike Sharples, who is a chair in educational technology at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University in the UK. So I actually think that we see this term educational technology pop up is a sign of the times. Professor Sharples has his undergraduate degree in computational science from the St. Andrew University, which is Scotland's oldest university, I found out. And he has his PhD from the University of Edinburgh in artificial intelligence. So actually, my research didn't actually conclusively verify that he might be Scottish, so maybe he'll be telling you whether he is or not. His PhD was entitled Cognition, Computation, and Creative Writing, so he's definitely one of the good guys. I'll let you, yeah. So his research interests are in human-centered design and evaluation of educational technology. He has sort of widely worked in the area of mobile and contextual learning. He's interested in doing design-based research to create novel social technical systems. And over the years, he has held a variety of positions, and just to mention two, in 1999, he became the director of the Center for Educational Technologies. So that's a long time ago, to be working in educational technology, and in fact have a title that has educational technology in the title. And distance learning, this was at the University of Birmingham. Later, he was at the University of Nottingham, where he was a professor in the learning sciences and director of the Learning Sciences Research Institute. He has inaugurated a series of conferences on mobile learning, and in fact has been the founding president of the association, the International Association for Mobile Learning. He is an associate editor-in-chief of the IEEE Transactions on Learning Technologies. He has actually published at scale with 300 publications, 3 books, and over 11,000 citations. And currently, he is the academic lead of FutureLearn, which is a company owned by the Open University in the UK that is also a MOOC platform. So it's running many MOOCs, working with leading universities both in the UK and all across Europe. And this platform has 3.5 million users by now. So it's another major MOOC platform. So that gives you an overview, and without further ado, let's welcome to the stage Professor Mike Sharples.
Well, thank you. I think that's the most fulsome introduction I've ever had. It's good to be back at Edinburgh. As I was saying to Jeff, I love Edinburgh. It's just the weather that's the problem. So what I'm going to talk about is effective pedagogy at scale. And this is the outline. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pedagogy for massive scale and what is effective pedagogy and how that can be scaled, to give an example of massive scale social learning, and also to offer some evidence of its effectiveness. And then, if there's time, to talk a little bit about another scalable pedagogy of citizen inquiry. So that's what I want to try and get through in the next 50 minutes or so. So just to go back a bit, my career has been involved in designing a number of different educational technology systems and platforms. And here are some of them: Cyclops, Mediate, MyArtSpace for museum learning, Personal Inquiry, Inquirit. All of them have been at, well, the largest scale one was 3,000 users of a mobile technology platform across museums. And I was pretty pleased with that, because as you know, as an education technologist, normally you get a piece of technology into a classroom and use it with 30 kids. So 3,000 I thought was pretty impressive. Then in 2011 I went to the Open University and started to engage with some of the OU's technologies. One of them was iSpot, which now has 55,000 users. And that, this is my first introduction to very large-scale technologies. Now I'm working with FutureLearn, which has got 3.5 million users. And now that's what I call learning at scale. And that's what I want to talk about for some of this presentation, about not only how do you engage with such a platform, but how do you design it? Because I was in the privileged position of being in right at the start of the founding of the FutureLearn company, and I was appointed by the Vice Chancellor of the Open University to be academic lead. And that role, in part, was to help inform the design of the platform. So we built an entire platform from scratch, and which now has 3.5 million people on it. So, how do you design for massive scale? So we know that there are technologies that work at massive scale, and most of you will have engaged with at least one, and some of you will have engaged with all of these technologies. And we know that they work at scale for streaming, social networking, file sharing, microblogging, community answers. And we also know that there are educational technologies that work at massive scale. And in 2004, the New Media Consortium published its Horizon report, and then became a series of reports on innovative technology for education. And this is the list of contents. Thank you to Rebecca over there. This is a list of contents from the first Horizon report. Now, what's interesting about that is the focus on the technology. And it's been extremely popular since. It's been very influential. But there are two issues with it. Firstly, technologies change. And if you look at that first report, there are some pretty peculiar technologies like scalable vector graphics. I'm not even sure what that is. And certainly it's not something that's currently in focus for education systems now. The other problem is that with the focus on the technology, you then tend to miss what the technology is used for. And for us, the technology is being used to support learning. And nowadays, people deploy a wide variety of different technologies to support their learning. And one of the things we learned from our focus on mobile learning is that it's not just a single technology that people use to support learning across locations and across times and across contexts. It's a variety of different technologies. So what we wanted to do 5 years ago was to do something like the Horizon report, but with a focus on the teaching, learning and assessment. And so we decided to produce a series of reports which we called Innovating Pedagogy. And at the time, we really searched for a title for those reports. And we knew that we wanted to focus on pedagogy, but we were advised not to use that term, not to use the P word, because nobody would understand it. And I think one of the changes that have happened over the last 5 years is that there is now a focus on the word pedagogy. The word pedagogy has come into currency. And the way we've used it is as a term to describe the theory and practice of teaching, learning and assessment. So we produced a series of reports exploring new forms of teaching, learning and assessment for a digital world to guide teachers and policymakers in productive innovation. And it's been pretty successful, not as successful as Horizon report, but pretty successful. We've had about 70,000 downloads of the most recent one, which was produced in collaboration with our good friends and colleagues at SRI International. And these are some of the pedagogies that we've identified. And pedagogies are a bit like fundamental particles. You start off with 3 or 4 of them, and then the more you look, the more you find. We're now up to about 30, and we still haven't found the grand unified particle yet. So, one of the questions is, which of these pedagogies actually work? Which of them are effective? So, here are some suggestions, here are some proposals for pedagogies that are effective. Visible learning and goal setting. Being able to ask learners to set their own personal goals and then to show how they're progressing towards achieving those goals and to make learning visible. To provide ways of identifying how somebody's reputation is increasing and then rewarding them for that growing reputation. Viewing learning as a social and a collaborative process and supporting collaboration between learners. Providing review and feedback, immediate feedback on learners. And some of these we heard yesterday, the power of formative assessment and mastery learning and personalising learning. I'm just going to pick a couple of those as examples. So visible learning. Some of you will know about the work of John Hattie, which is a masterwork. John Hattie's a New Zealand educational theorist and educational researcher who did a synthesis of over 800 meta-analyses. So he took not just studies, but meta-studies, and he synthesized 800 meta-studies of what makes for effective learning. And he compared all of these different meta-studies and put them into one book. And the title is a bit of a giveaway. The title of the book is Visible Learning. And out of all of those meta-studies, the ones that he identified as being most successful predictors of effective learning are those aspects of learning that make the learning visible. And as he said in the book, what is most important is that the teaching is visible to the student and that the learning is visible to the teacher. The more the student becomes a teacher, the more the teacher becomes the learner, the more successful are the outcomes. So the more that we can make our learning visible, the more successful it's going to be. And it's not a coincidence that we're coordinating with the LAC conference, and the main theme of the LAC conference is about how you can make the learning more visible through dashboards and through analytics. So that's one. Another one is social learning. And in 2009, Meltzoff and colleagues produced a very influential paper in the journal Science called Foundations for a New Science of Learning. And what they indicated was that we're going through a new sort of renaissance in our understanding of learning that brings together findings from psychology, from neuroscience, from education, and also from machine learning. And at the end of that paper, they said a key component in learning is the role of the social. And they left it as a question, what makes social interaction such a powerful catalyst for learning? So those are two indicators of effective learning. But what we wanted to look at with designing FutureLearn was what sorts of pedagogies are not just effective, but also effective at massive scale. So to take you back to 2012, when we started to set up the FutureLearn platform, we'd seen Coursera and edX, and we knew that we wanted to build a platform that was at least as successful as those, but based on a very different sort of pedagogy. One that wasn't just around capturing lectures and making them available online to large numbers of people, but would support an innovative approach to teaching and learning based on what we knew then about effective and scalable pedagogies. So we had to rethink effective pedagogies for online learning, for massive scale, for sustainability, because this was a company that we wanted to last for many years, for a wide variety of learners with different abilities and cultures, and also learning for self-motivation rather than learning for exams and for credit, and across multiple devices. So that was a challenge. Well, this is a FutureLearn platform now, and you can go to it at www.futurelearn.com. So, what sort of pedagogies work at scale? Well, some educational methods get worse with scale. So if you're doing sports coaching, for example, it's great if you're doing one-to-one sports coaching, or if you have a personal trainer, it maybe works with 10 people. It doesn't really scale. You can't do that sort of sports coaching at massive scale. Some educational methods don't change with scale. So what I'm doing now, lecturing, is also being filmed and will be webcast. So it can work for 100 people, it can work for 1,000 or 10,000 people, and it's pretty much the same experience. And that was the basis of the edX and Coursera platforms, that you get pretty much the same experience at scale. But which educational methods improve with scale? Are there any that actually get better the more people who take part? So one indicator is Metcalfe's law. And it came out of network theory and also came out of business processes. That for some network systems, the value of a product or service increases with the number of people using it. So the telephone system is not terribly useful when there's only 2 people with telephones, but the more people who have telephones, the more people who are interconnected, the more valuable it becomes. And that's kind of the basis for the original CMOOCs, the connectivist MOOCs. The more people who took part, the more valuable it would become. And for learning, obviously, you don't just want to have data connections, as in telephones. You want to support effective interaction, effective collaboration. So networks enable learning if they support conversations that are new, important, timely, usable, understandable, appropriate, and trusted. And I'm quoting this from a paper by, or blog entry by Stephen Downes called The Personal Network Effect. So what we want to do is to try and develop effective social networks for learning. Now I want to give a little bit of a digression to Andrew Gordon Speedie Pask. Amazing name and an amazing person. Among his other achievements are that apparently he was the original inspiration in the 1960s for the character Doctor Who. And he was quite a character. He dressed as an Edwardian dandy, which kind of inspired the Doctor Who character. In the introduction to me, mentioned that I'm an educational technologist. He was the original educational technologist. He had a post at the Open University as Professor of Educational Technology, which is the same title as I have. So he was a visiting chair at the Open University and very influential in the development in the early days of the Open University. But he also invented things. So he invented a number of amazing machines, including the first commercial adaptive teaching system in the, when was it? The early 1970s, the Saki system for teaching typewriting. And it was a genuine adaptive teaching system, and he set up a company and sold a number of these. And he developed a number with his company, a number of different pieces of educational technology. So he was a genuine educational technologist, but he was also an educational theorist. And he developed an approach which he called conversation, learning as conversation theory. And it came from a very different pedigree to the sorts of learning theories that you may know about. So instructivist, social constructivist, sociocultural theories, cognitivist theories. It was derived from cybernetics. Now, cybernetics is the study of how organisms respond to their environment. And first-order cybernetics is about how animals adapt to their environments. Second-order cybernetics is about how organisms, human organisms, come to know that they are adjusting to their environment and how they can manage and control the way in which they adjust and interact. And we do that through language. We do that through conversation. And what he suggested was that conversation is the fundamental process of learning. That we converse with ourselves as we come to understand our own actions, as we reflect on our own activity, and we converse with other people in order to reach a mutual understanding. And we do that through language. So he suggested that the conversation is a minimum necessary structure to enable learning. And also, again, way ahead of his time, he had a distributed cognition notion that you can have multiple conversations within one mind, but you can have one conversation across multiple minds. So the fundamental process of learning can be distributed. And furthermore, can involve technology as a conversational partner. Intelligent tutoring systems, adaptive teaching systems, you can have conversations with technology. So it's a general socio-technical theory of learning. And we have conversations about the how and why of a topic. We have conversations about the how of learning, for example, discussing study skills or reflecting on experiences of the learner. And we have broader conversations about the purposes, the why of learning. So what did all this have to do with FutureLearn? Well, we wanted to have an underlying theory of learning which could also act as a set of design requirements for the platform. Now this is a diagram of learning as conversation. It's also due to Diana Laurillard, who was also a Pro Vice Chancellor at the Open University and influential in developing systems in the UK based on Pask's conversational theory. And basically, what it says is that you, as a learner, if you look at the left-hand side, you have conversations with yourselves as you are developing actions and then reflecting on those actions. And you have conversations with other people about something that you're doing together around some shared medium. It might be a shared lab, it might be an experiment, it might be a piece of content. So you have how sort of questions where you're proposing goals, proposing learning goals, and modifying your actions in relation to this piece of learning material. And then you have conversations at this higher level about what and why. What are we trying to do? Why are we doing it? And you also need some medium to support those higher level conversations. Now this he designed deliberately as being an implementable model. And when I showed this to the first software design team at FutureLearn, along with some various other theories of learning, so socio-cultural theories, this was the first one that they got. The first one that the software developers could really see, okay, we can implement this. We can implement these sorts of conversations. We can implement this. We can design this shared medium. It was a specification for design. And that was the basis on which we designed the FutureLearn platform. Now, 4 years on, this is one example of a course being run on the FutureLearn platform. It's Understanding IELTS from the British Council. It's the largest ever gathering of learners. There were 270,000 people registered just for that one course, and 190,000 people started that course from 190 countries. For many, it was their first time learning online, and as you'll see, about a third of them contributed to the online discussions, 25% on mobile devices. So it's been phenomenally successful. And I want to talk a little bit more detail about how that theory of learning as conversation informed the design of the platform. So if you look here at this bottom bit about learners conversing with partners, which could be other learners or could be educators, around some shared medium. So one requirement for this is that every conversation is grounded in a piece of learning. So you don't have forums, you don't have general conversations about the course in general. Each conversation is grounded on some piece of learning. So here's the first video from the Understanding IELTS course with, it's called Exams and Me, that first video. And as part of it, it then asks questions. Do any of you, do you agree with the speakers in the video? How do exams make you feel? So it opens up conversation. And if you click, then you get that free-flowing water cooler type of conversation. And here, yes, the first thing I want is Rob's accent, and then a response from the educator, yes, very British. Guys, I just created a group on Facebook for those looking for another learner to practice their English, join the meetup. So these are learners then creating their own learning resources associated with that one video. Now, you might have seen there are 57,029 comments. Just that one video had 57,000 comments on it. So we had an unexpected problem. When we designed it, we thought, each piece of content, there might be 10, 20 comments on it. We never realized that there might be 57,000 comments. So we had an unexpected problem to solve, which is how you deal with that massive scale of conversation around every piece of content. So we had some very skilled people working on FutureLearn, and they came up with the obvious solution, which was to use social networking techniques from other social network platforms. So here are some of them. So being able to filter comments here, so you can filter by the most liked comments. You can follow, so you can see, and one of the design decisions we made was that people didn't use pseudonyms, that they used their real names, so that you were interacting with real learners rather than avatars or pseudonyms. So this is a real learner on the platform, and this is her activity. She's had 154 followers, following 21 people. Moderating, so one of the other issues is if you've got that volume of content, how do you moderate it? And so we have active moderation, and we have a moderating company that's used now to moderate those comments. And roles, so we've got lead educator roles with different permissions. So we brought in social networking techniques. Here's another part of that conversational framework, which is conversations with partners at a higher level, at the level of descriptions. So where you're talking about not just how do you do something, but why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve? So here's another extract from the Understanding IELTS course. What advice would you give? As a result of what you've learned this week, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to a learner in your country to help them improve their listening? So FutureLearn is designed according to what we originally called pedagogic Lego bricks. So pieces of pedagogy that are put together in a sequence. And the atomic elements, the basic pedagogic elements, are called steps. And then they build up into activities and into weeks and into the whole course. And one of the steps is a discussion step, where you have these higher level discussions initiated and mediated by educators. So that's an example there of this higher level of discussion. We're just about, belatedly, but it's happening now, to put study groups onto the platform as well, where you can have direct interaction, much more focused interaction with other learners throughout the course. And we're making it very easy to enter those discussion groups. And the educators will be able to post into those discussion groups to set big questions, to set problems for those discussion groups to solve. And the educators can also, as well as posting to all of the discussion groups, will be able to intervene into them as well and to engage in those discussions. One thing that isn't in the FutureLearn platform, because it isn't finished yet, it isn't perfect, is the ability to be able to reflect on your own learning. And there are many different ways that you could do that. For example, being able to annotate pieces of content and being able to share those annotations. So there are still things that can be done in that conversational model to create further learning opportunities, particularly reflective learning opportunities. Does it work? So when we started doing this in 2012, there were other platforms that were offering instructivist approaches to teaching and learning, but none that were based around what we later call social learning or social network learning. Now, some of those elements are available on other platforms, particularly the ability to associate discussions and comments with each piece of content. So what I've got here is a comparison of with other platforms in the early stages from 2013, July 2013 to 2014. And we tried to do a fair comparison. So we compared courses of 5 weeks or longer with tests. Because if you want to have high completion rates for MOOCs, it's easy. All you do is have very short MOOCs with no tests. So if you want to do a fair comparison, then you need to compare like with like. So we compared 5 weeks or longer with tests. And these are the main performance indicators from FutureLearn. The number of registrants, the number of people who actually start, who don't just register but visit the course, those who engage with the course material, those who post at least one comment, and those who complete the course. And these are we did a comparison with FutureLearn, with Coursera, and also with Edinburgh Coursera courses. So our friends at Edinburgh provided us with the data for their Coursera courses because we wanted to compare kind of, again, like with like UK Coursera courses with UK FutureLearn courses. And finally with edX. And this was the published data that we managed to get hold of. The mean number of registrants, you can see there. The percentage of registrants who became learners is pretty consistent across platforms. Again, the percentage of active learners, those who engage with the course material, is pretty consistent. The biggest difference was in the social learners. So we found that it was effective in terms of engaging people with social interaction on the platform. The completing learners, the ones who completed the courses, FutureLearn was at least as successful as other platforms. Interestingly, the Edinburgh Coursera courses were similar completion rates. One of the reasons for that was that Edinburgh's very wisely chosen its courses to have to appeal to people with particular focused interests. Some of the other platforms and other courses had a much broader range. So it works. So what I want to go on to now is if you've got a pedagogy that is scalable, and I want to suggest that that approach of learning as conversation is a scalable and effective pedagogy, are there any other pedagogies that you can then scale up to massive scale? And here's a kind of set of requirements. You want pedagogies that enable diversity. You want to support people with different abilities, with different experiences, demographics, locations. You want to support a wide variety of different sorts of people. You want them to be available. You want it to work when and where people need to be able to learn. And you want to make available resources and skills from other people. And you want to give it opportunity. You want to allow people to share their interests, to be able to solve immediate problems, and to motivate them. Now, if you look at the intersections of these, then there are some platforms and systems, so sort of game-based learning that are intersections of those two, social network learning, which I've talked about, which are intersections of those, and mobile group learning, which are intersections of those. But what sits in the middle? What enables and supports all of those sorts of scalable pedagogies? So we've been looking at some other possibilities. So just very quickly, another one that we've looked at, very different to FutureLearn, is what we call citizen inquiry. And citizen inquiry takes citizen science, which again we know works at massive scale. There are citizen science platforms like Galaxy Zoo that have got hundreds of thousands of people engaged, and inquiry-based learning, and also shared creativity, so that instead of doing science on behalf of trained scientists, what if you had a Kickstarter approach where anybody can propose a scientific investigation, and then instead of trying to get money for it, you're trying to get participants, try to get other people to take part. And the more people who take part, the more successful it is. So the bigger it gets, the more successful it is. So that's what we've, another scalable pedagogy that we've looked at. And I mentioned at the beginning, iSpot from the Open University has got about 55,000, 60,000 learners on it. And it's based around observations of nature. So the idea is that you go out and you capture some bit of nature. It could be a tree, it could be a leaf, it could be a bird, it could be an animal. and then you share it with other people. You try to identify what it is you've seen, and if you're a novice, it might be, you know, a song thrush or a robin. If you're an expert, it could be a piece of fungus or a more obscure bird or insect. And then you try to identify it, and then other people in the community support you in that identification. So you've got a number of features of this. Firstly, reputation. So the people who take part, the more identifications they make, the more reputation they get, but also the more they support other people in making identifications, the more reputation they have. And there's a sophisticated reputation engine behind iSpot. Then observation, you make an observation. Then identification, you try to identify what you've seen, and then other people in the community then confirm that identification. And so you can then, once you've identified it, you can see other examples of that species that other people have identified. So it's a community citizen science platform. And here's a nice example. So this beautiful picture here was taken by somebody who noticed water droplets in a piece of fungus. And she said, I noticed these little globules on what looked like a spider's web inside a small cup fungus about 1.5 centimeters in diameter. They were spherical and quite pretty looking. That's a bit of an understatement. Could it be water, or might it be some kind of egg? And then somebody else on the platform very quickly came back and said, there are some fungus gnats which have predatory larvae which spin silk webs. In a similar way to spiders, they add droplets of glutinous liquid to the web to track the insects. So you're not just getting sort of simple observations, you're getting this community of interest and community of inquiry. And of course, once you've got wildlife that has been effectively identified, then you've got a learning resource. So then you can do things like create crowdsourced assessment. So you can create quizzes, select the image that contains Eurasian jay, and then 4 pictures provided by people who take part with the identifications, and then you've got to then pick the correct one. So there are other opportunities for learning once you've got that crowdsourced identification. So that's the iSpot system. What we're just working on now is a kind of generalization of that. So if you can do that for wildlife, can you do it more generally? Can you get people to propose science inquiries and then get other people to then participate? So we've developed a platform called Inquire It, and you can go www.inquire-it.org, and that's what you see. A number of different, very different sorts of investigations proposed by members of the public. So let's look at that one, identify the cloud. So it's for people who are interested in clouds, and including people who've posted pictures of pretty clouds, but also ones who've had some genuinely scientifically interesting and unusual clouds like lenticular clouds. And it's then become a platform for discussion and of sharing and of identification in the same way as iSpot. But instead of it being just for wildlife, it's now for any area of science and community sharing. Another example, because that's the sort of identification, we call them missions, identification missions, we've also got missions that rely on sensors. So we've got an associated mobile app, an Android app called Sense It, and you can go to the Google Play Store and Sense It and download that app. And what it does is it unlocks all of the sensors on your mobile phone. So a typical mobile phone will have around 15 sensors, accelerometers, pressure sensors, temperature sensors, noise sensors. It gives you access to all of those sensors. So you can just click on it and see the wiggly line for noise or light. But you can also link it in then to the Inquire It platform. You can create missions that make use of those sensors so that people using their mobile devices can collect data. So this is one on creating a noise map. So you create a noise map around, if it's for children, around your school, around your environment. This is somebody in Buenos Aires who's been working with teachers creating a noise map around Buenos Aires using the Sensit app and the Inquirit platform. So that's another example of a scalable pedagogy. Interestingly, we haven't yet managed to get it to take off. And one of the issues to work with scalable pedagogy is it's not enough to know that a pedagogy can be scalable. You then need to get up to that critical mass of people to make it work. And this is one of the areas that we're looking at with our researchers, with PhD students. How can you, if you like, kickstart the whole platform to get it up to the level that enough people are taking part that it then becomes self-sustaining? So we're trying to understand then how you can get pedagogies and technologies that are not only scalable but also long-term sustaining. So to finish, effective pedagogy. We know that there are some pedagogies that are effective because there's 40, 50 years of research now in types of pedagogies that work. And if anybody says to you, we don't really know what works in teaching and learning, the answer is we do. There is a lot of research now on effective pedagogies, and this is a pretty good starting point on pedagogies that work. But we have to rethink for massive scale and for sustainability. And I want to leave you just with one challenge, which is this. How can we combine that social networked technology, social network pedagogy that we know that works at massive scale with personalised learning and with adaptive teaching? I think it's a big research challenge. If you can bring together adaptivity and social learning at massive scale, then I think we've got something really exciting and really effective. So that's what I'm going to leave you with as a research challenge. Thank you. Questions? Oh, lots, yes.
It's very difficult to see countries move the bar forward. If I go into pedagogies, and I want to ask a question about how this relates to standard college, high-level people.
To what's it?
I wanted to ask you how you view your system in relation to high-level college teaching. So when I look at the Future Learn courses, these things work beautifully, and it's clear why you get the assessors that you get. I mean, the tests of performance, the improvements. But these are not high-level university courses. They are not learning calculus, physics, statistics. I think that I would put the category of courses there more as I don't know, high-level entertainment, educational entertainment. I mean, it's a fine mission. There's a lot of people who want to keep learning and thinking hard about things. So I go through the courses and I complete the course. They are extremely interesting. They're very well done. They are engaging. But could I use these methodologies and these technologies at a scalable way to teach a University of Edinburgh electrical engineering class? Do you have any evidence for that? And do you view that as the mission of Future Learn?
So one obvious answer is Higgs boson. So there's a course on the Future Learn platform on the Higgs boson. And if you want a high-level course, then that's an example. There were over 10,000 learners who were engaging in that topic. So there are some high-level topics. But I think you're meaning more than that, which is that many of those people went on there for the same reason that they read Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, because they wanted to be challenged, but they were mostly leisure learners. So we do now have professional and CPD courses on there. We have across a wide range, so health courses, financial courses, business courses. So we do have courses at postgraduate and professional development level. And it's one of our big challenges and one of the big aims of Future Learn is to get courses for qualification and credit. And in fact, over the next few weeks, months, there's going to be what FutureLearn calls programs, which are a chain of different courses leading up to certification and credit, and in collaboration with accrediting agencies. So I agree with you that one of the big challenges at the moment of MOOCs and MOOC platforms is to move from very effective leisure learners and people who are studying for leisure and entertainment into new areas. One of them is CPD. The other one is people who are wanting to gain new skills. So that IELTS course, again, was not leisure learners. The people who took part in that IELTS course, many of them from the Middle East, are desperate to learn English and to take the IELTS qualification, and they were highly motivated. They were taking this course because they wanted to achieve a particular qualification. So I would dispute that MOOCs are just about learning for entertainment, but we still have a journey to go on to integrate free open courses, particularly with master's level and continuing professional development courses, and also to provide pathways from MOOC courses into other qualifications and to provide accreditation and records of attainment for those courses. So it's still a challenge, but it's one that we're trying to meet, and we certainly recognize.
Hi, Mike. This is a great talk. I wanted to ask a kind of a different sort of question about platform and its role here, but just to put that in context, I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about what business we're in education. And a few kind of general thoughts are, one, this is really kind of a bad business. It's not really a great commercial opportunity for everyone, and we ought to think about it in some terms that are associated with that. Second, this doesn't seem to be a natural monopoly. There doesn't seem to be the same kind of network effects as in social networking generally. There are economies of scale, but they're more linear rather than quadratic of the sort. Different learners want to distinguish themselves by the different program they took from others and different institutions they're associated with, and they want to have their T-shirt from their institution and be different from others. So another question along that line is, to what extent is this a platform activity? You gave a really nice summary of different kinds of tools that we use online for different purposes, video, blogging, file sharing, collaboration platforms. So I'm wondering really what your view is at this point on the role of a single kind of large platform which aggregates and collects a large number of features versus thinking about a learning activity that involves a community being charted in some way, but maybe drawing on different technologies for different parts of it. So how do you see the platform, and is that central, or is it a coordination piece, and what's your view on that?
It's a very good question. So as most of you know, the original MOOC platforms were connectivist or CMOOCs, which were much more about a disaggregated set of tools that a community of people came together for a common purpose, but using a wide range of tools and use their own tools to carry out that activity. The problem with the CMOOCs is two of them. One is that it tends to work for people who are already familiar with a wide range of tools and can move seamlessly between those tools. If you're trying to bring in learners from areas as diverse as the Philippines and China, then just going and saying, okay, use a Google Hangout or whatever. Well, for some countries they can't. They can't even get access to those tools. And others, they just don't have the digital literacy to be able to move seamlessly from one to the other. The other issue is around orchestration. And I think it's something that we are still trying to work with and understand of how do you both design and orchestrate a successful sequence of learning. And one of the other benefits that I haven't mentioned around FutureLearn is that many of the people who came to develop the original FutureLearn platform came from the BBC. And I was very skeptical that people from the BBC could make any contribution towards designing a learning platform. But what they brought was this notion of storytelling and narrative. And there are some courses, for instance, from the University of Strathclyde that have a very strong narrative drive. So there is a forensic science course that was based around a reenactment of a murder, and then each week you use a different forensic technique to investigate that murder, footprint analysis or blood sample analysis, and there was a very strong narrative flow, even with cliffhangers that took you over to the next week. They now decided that all of their courses are going to have that same sort of narrative drive. So I think there is work to be done on orchestration of learning, how you in real time manage that learning process, but also learning design. And to do that, then you need to have a more constrained set of tools. So what I think is there will be a core platform, and there should be a core platform, and that platform should be orchestrated and designed. But it should be extensible, and it should be extensible in real time. So you saw that link there from somebody saying, oh, I've just formed a Facebook group, or I've just formed a Google Hangout. I think encouraging learners themselves to go on around the periphery of that narrative-led learning activity, then to create other spaces with their own tools, their own communities, and actively encourage that. In that way, I think you can have the best of both, that you can have that orchestrated learning experience, particularly for people who are not so digitally literate, but also provide a space for exploration and inquiry learning around it. And I think we've still got work to do on that.
Neil Heffernan, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Really good talk, got me thinking about a bunch of things. I'm particularly interested in actually, like your example of, you were crowdsourcing from people observations of birds, and then later on, once you actually kind of felt like you knew what the answers were, then you were using that in a quizzing infrastructure, right? And there's something really powerful about crowdsourcing, but there's clearly hierarchies that need to be built in order to actually build confidence. And I'm just wondering about, because most of your talk was all about actually conversational elements that actually weren't clear that there were right or wrong answers compared to many other systems we've heard about. And but sometimes when there are right or wrong answers, it's also nice to be able to figure out how to put those together. And so, anyways, I'm not sure if actually it would be useful for you to say a little bit more about how do you actually deal with these conversations. And you mentioned these roles of a moderator, and there's two roles that you've made up later. And how do those relate to actually knowing? Because sometimes we actually do know what the answer is, or maybe the community knows the answer with enough. Do you have any thoughts on actually how do you build the hierarchies necessary to learn those?
I think that's fascinating, and I think, again, it's something we're only just starting to understand, and it relates to where does knowledge and authority come from. And it comes, as we're finding, in two ways. One, it comes from above, by people who have been accredited or recognized, who've gone through the apprenticeship of gaining a doctorate, becoming a university professor, writing papers, getting citations. So that's one source of authority, people who have been recognized by their academic peers as being sources of authority in this particular area. The other is from the bottom up, the Wikipedia way, so people who gain reputation from interacting with their community, and then from the bottom up, gaining levels of reputation. In iSpot, we did both. So we primed it with people who were recognized experts. So people from wildlife organizations, from nature organizations. And I mentioned the reputation management system. They were giving high status. They were giving a lot of points at the start, high reputation, because they were recognized authorities. And we wanted to bootstrap the whole system in terms of giving authoritative recognition to the observations. And they were not only, they were then trained in how to use the system, and we still have that notion of people who are paid to act as tutors and mentors and authoritative voices on the system. The other is from the bottom up, and the reputation management system, in brief, what it does is if you make a successful observation that other people then recognize, you gain reputation credit. Particularly if somebody with high reputational standing validates your observation, you get more credit from that. So you're pulled up as an observer by people who already have high reputational standing in the community. And that seems to work. And it's been the basis for the iSpot system, where you have that top-down authority, but also the bottom-up community recognition. So there are now heuristics and algorithms that can manage the interaction between those sources of authority. But as we all know, there are some areas where still authority is disputed. And on MOOC platforms, if it was an engineering course, then you can pretty much say that an authority in Newtonian mechanics is going to be right. But there are many other areas in ecology, in political science, where you've got disputed authority. And that's where you need that higher level process of coming to know, of people then having a medium in which they can share their differences. And on FutureLearn, we haven't shied away from that on the platform. We've had a course on Muslims in Britain. We've had a course on climate and climate change. And one of the things we found was that by giving that space for high-level discussion, we haven't had the sort of flaming, and also by having large amount of discussion, then the dissenting voices weren't exactly drowned out, but they weren't followed and prioritized and liked. And so they didn't become annoying, prominent. In fact, the most irritating and the most annoying person has been in all of the courses at FutureLearn was a Shakespeare denier. So there was a course on Shakespeare, and there was somebody who claimed that Shakespeare didn't exist and his plays were written by somebody else. And he was the most annoying person, because we couldn't just delete him from the platform, because he had a point of view. And he just popped up everywhere. Every course that had the word Shakespeare in, he was up there saying Shakespeare didn't exist. So we've had some of the issues about how you deal with these dissenting voices. But in general, the learning as conversation works. Yeah.
Peter Mitros, edX. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for really pushing forward the state-of-the-art platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken several FutureLearn courses, and they were wonderful. We've taken several elements back. I wanted to actually question one comment that you make, which was, I think the exact quote was that lectures were, quote, the basis of the edX and Coursera platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So the X book movement started with Udacity, at the time No Labs.
Mm-hmm.
Sebastian Thrun actually did a very thoughtful exercise where it was based not on a lecture model, but exactly on a mentoring model. The thing that at the beginning of your talk you said couldn't scale,
Mm-hmm.
that started out with Khan Academy, where the field was two people looking at a copies of paper. Sebastian took that one step further, where this was based on a student doing a lot of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at a piece of paper, I set up a problem, the student does it.
Mm-hmm.
That's grounded a lot of research, Richard Meyer's work, that's grounded in work on formative assessment, on constructive, not constructivist, but constructive learning from Mickey
Mm-hmm.
G. edX took that a few steps further. We had a little bit of time to evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
Coursera basically cloned the Udacity platform
Mm-hmm.
and went with a somewhat different pedagogy on it, so that's a separate story.
Mm-hmm.
But edX added a lot of authentic assessment to
Mm-hmm.
that, a lot of immediate feedback, mastery learning.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a different set of research elements.
Yeah.
It was research elements that were based much more on cognitive science and evidence-based
Mm-hmm.
rather than educational philosophy. But I'm kind of wondering if, at the time, as you said, you sort of thought lecture-based. No one actually called either myself up, or Sebastian or whoever else to ask what the elements were what forming FutureLearn. I'm wondering if this is a good time to sort of evaluate, share notes, and see how we can merge the approaches, or basically what you see as the path going forward to get both of those in place.
So the first thing I should say is that I'm not claiming that learning as conversation is the solution to all learning and learning at scale. And when I showed that list of effective pedagogies, one of the ones I mentioned, well, two that I mentioned, was learning through feedback and mastery learning. And they are effective pedagogies. I think there are still limitations on the FutureLearn platform, one of which is that we haven't effectively yet implemented mastery learning and criterion-based learning on that platform. Personally, I think that there are still opportunities for a platform that tries to integrate more of those effective pedagogies. So if I were going to design a platform now, I would want to have one that was based very strongly around visible learning and goal setting, where learners can set their own goals and make those goals visible to other learners, and then can be tracked as to how and give their own indication of how they're performing against those goals, and that the educators, the instructors can see performance against those goals. I would base it around mastery learning, and particularly the power of formative assessment and formative feedback and dynamic assessment, and the ability to take, for some subjects, some courses, not all of them, but for some of them, to take assessment repeatedly up to a mastery level. And also around social learning, being able to share your understanding and your perspective with other people. I think if we can, but I think there are some courses where mastery learning is more effective and should be the heart of the learning experience. Some courses where social learning and sharing of experience and sharing of perspectives is more effective. It's not necessary for all courses that you should achieve mastery. If you can understand people's perspectives. For instance, we've got courses on history. We've got a course on Hadrian's Wall, for example. It's not necessary to achieve mastery of expertise in all aspects of Hadrian's Wall as a historical artifact in order to gain success and to gain valuable learning from that course. So different courses need different pedagogies. But in terms of the design of the platform, I am not claiming that FutureLearn any means is the perfect platform, and I would want to see, and I hope we will see, platforms that combine elements from edX and Udacity, particularly around mastery learning and competency-based learning, along with the social constructivist learning that you've got from FutureLearn. So I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Mahmoud Ghani from Pearson. I want to suggest that a lot of the pedagogical models that you enumerated in the beginning of your lecture, excellent lecture by the way, thank you very much for that, that those are constrained by the ethnographic base, in the sense that the theories that are used to, that are constructed, inspired by or informed by tacitly or explicitly by the data drawn from the community of learners of certain cultures. So I think I'm interested in the possibility of disrupting and developing those pedagogical theories by widening the reach and access to non-traditional communities. And I think we have the opportunity to do that using social media inspired platforms. So I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on that, and whether it's something that you've investigated or you're planning to investigate.
So that you're right that there is a major issue to be explored around cultural differences, around different perspectives that people bring to learning. And as all of the platforms, not just FutureLearn, but all of the platforms have expanded out into different regions, different countries, we've discovered these different cultural perspectives. Very much so with the Understanding IELTS course from the British Council, where we brought in people from the Middle East, from China, from Ukraine. There are a lot of assumptions and a lot of naivety, I think, around different perspectives. For instance, that Chinese learners are rigidly drilled and are not capable of higher order thinking. That's just wrong for many reasons. Yesterday I was just reading a paper exactly on that subject. So we need to, I think, cast aside some of the cultural assumptions we have about other cultures and about how other learners learn. And also we're now working in a world in which there is a lot of cultural and social interaction, not as much as there should be, but cultural and social interaction. I think the two things we've got to do is, one, not make initial cultural assumptions, but really try to understand the perspectives of other learners, which means going out and talking with the learners, trying to understand the way in which they view their learning experience. And secondly, we've got to guard against cultural imperialism, of assuming that the way in which we teach and we learn is going to be equally valuable to everybody else. I think it's a fascinating area. One of the things we've tried to do with FutureLearn is actually go out and collect user voices in two ways. One, there is a user voice area on the platform where people can make suggestions, raise issues, but also we've gone out and interviewed, we've done Skype interviews with scores, if not hundreds, of learners now from different countries trying to understand their different perspectives. But I think there's a massive research opportunity and research need to try and understand these different perspectives rather than making initial assumptions.
So one last question.
Chase Geigel, UIUC. I wanted to draw a parallel, I think, to a talk that was given yesterday, where they investigated whether or not when you have conversations around topics that have multiple points of view, whether or not students form sort of siloed groups or whether they're actually having diverse conversations about potentially politically charged conversations or maybe religious conversations or things like that. Do you have a sense of whether siloing is occurring or is not occurring in Future Learn, where a lot of the focus is on having those conversations?
It's a major problem, that of siloing, and we know now from social science and sociology research that people get confirmed in their views. You form networks, including online networks, that just tend to confirm your own worldview. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to have those sort of free-flowing conversations, so that, and we had long discussions at the start of designing the Future Learn platform exactly about silos, and that we didn't want people to form into silos. We didn't want to put them into cohorts so that you could have that broader interaction. What's tended to happen is, I think one of the consequences is that minority views, they haven't been suppressed, but they've been kind of overwhelmed by the flow. So we haven't had silos, but probably we haven't done enough to encourage minority perspectives. And one of the things that we want to do with the educators, and which is why we've got the educator role and lead educator, is to try and support minority perspectives, to say, okay, this may be what most of you are saying, but here's a voice over here, let's listen to that. So there's a role for the educator in that. Now that we've got small group discussions that are about to go on the platform in June, it's something we're very conscious of, that if we've got a group of 20 people, then maybe you could get some quite siloed and possibly quite extreme discussions. So this is why we want to have lots of educator dashboards, the ability for the educator to intervene in the discussions, to try and support the broadening of perspectives. And we're also looking at group size, so you've got enough people in that group to have multiple perspectives. So it's something that we're very aware of, and that we're just